The wind screamed through the mountain pass like a wounded beast, tearing at Ilara's fur cloak with claws of ice and rain. She pressed herself against the rocky cliff face, her fingers numb and bleeding from gripping the jagged stone. Behind her, the caravan had vanished into the white chaos of the storm, their torches swallowed by sheets of horizontal rain that turned the world into a blur of grey and black. "Wait!" she had screamed, but her voice was nothing against the thunder that split the sky. The ground had given way beneath her feet during a lightning strike, sending her tumbling down a steep embankment while the others pressed forward, unaware she had fallen. Or perhaps they knew. Perhaps they had seen her slip and made the calculation that all travelers in these harsh lands understood. And life was not worth risking 12. Ilara's legs trembled as she forced herself to move along the cliff, searching desperately for shelter. The storm had come without warning, a wall of darkness that swept down from the peaks with supernatural speed. The traders had said these mountains were cursed, that the old spirits still walked here, angry at being forgotten. She had dismissed it as superstition meant to justify their inflated prices for safe passage. Now, as hail began to mix with the rain, stones the size of her fist bouncing off the rocks around her, she wondered if they had been right. Her healer's satchel, soaked and heavy, banged against her hip with each stumbling step. Inside were her tools, bone needles, dried herbs wrapped in leather, obsidian blades sharper than any metal. She had trained for 7 winters under the old woman of her village, learning which roots stopped bleeding and which leaves brought fever down. Those skills had made her valuable to the caravan, valuable enough that they had taken her on despite her youth. Valuable enough, she had thought, that they would not leave her behind. The cold was becoming unbearable. Ilara's teeth chattered so violently she feared they might shatter. Her dark hair, usually braided and pinned, hung in frozen ropes around her face. She could no longer feel her feet inside her leather boots. The stories her mentor had told her about the cold death came back to her now. How it made you sleepy. How it whispered that rest was all you needed. How it stole your life while you dreamed of summer fires. Through the sheets of rain, a darker shadow appeared in the cliff face. A cave. Ilara lurched toward it, nearly falling as her numb legs betrayed her. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough for her shoulders, but she didn't care. She squeezed through, scraping her arms on the rough stone, and stumbled into sudden, shocking stillness. The wind's howl became muffled. The rain no longer struck her face. Ilara collapsed onto the cave floor, her body shaking uncontrollably. She tried to reach for her satchel, thinking of the fire-starting stones inside, but her fingers wouldn't obey. The darkness of the cave pressed around her, absolute and suffocating. She had no way of knowing how deep it went, whether animals sheltered here, whether she had just traded one death for another. Her vision began to blur. Strange lights danced at the edges of her sight, not real lights, she knew, but the hallucinations that came with cold death. She thought of her village, of the small clay house she had shared with her mentor, of the garden where they grew healing herbs. She thought of the boy who had asked her to stay, who had promised to wait for her return. She had laughed and told him the world was larger than their village, that she needed to see it, to learn from other healers in distant lands. Now she would see nothing at all. As her consciousness began to fade, Ilara noticed something odd. The cave floor beneath her cheek was not rough stone, but smoothed, as though shaped by tools and countless footsteps. And there, so faint she thought she might be imagining it, was warmth. Not the warmth of her own fading body heat, but something deeper, rising from the earth itself. With the last of her strength she crawled forward, following that phantom warmth. Her hands struck something hard, carved wood. A post, then another. She was in a tunnel, she realized. Not a natural cave, but something made by human hands. The warmth grew stronger, and with it came a smell, smoke, rendered fat, cured hides. People lived here. Hope and fear warred in her failing mind. People meant shelter, fire, survival. But people in these mountains also meant danger. The Highland tribes were legendary for their violence, for their hatred of outsiders, for their ancient laws that few lowlanders understood. The traders had spoken of the cave dwellers in whispers, calling them savages who still followed the old ways, who took heads as trophies and threw their prisoners from the cliffs as offerings to the mountain spirits. And Elara's body made the choice, her mind could not. She crawled toward the warmth, toward the smoke smell, toward whatever fate awaited her in the darkness. Her hand found another carved post, then a smooth stone that radiated heat like a living thing. She pulled herself against it, pressing her frozen body to its surface, and finally, mercifully, the cold released its grip enough for her to slip into. Unconsciousness, she did not see the warriors who found her at dawn. She did not see their shock at discovering a stranger in their sacred tunnel. She did not see the cave chief called from his morning council, his face dark with fury at this violation of their territory. She did not see him kneel beside her still form, reaching to check if she lived or died, his calloused hand hovering over her shoulder. She did not see him freeze, his eyes widening, as his fingers brushed aside her torn collar and revealed the mark burned into her skin, a spiral of flames that seemed to dance in the torchlight, ancient and impossible, a symbol his people had not seen for 7 generations. The mark of the Fire Queen. Consciousness returned to Elara in fragments. First came awareness of warmth, blessed, overwhelming warmth that seemed to sink into her bones. Then sound, crackling fire, low voices speaking in a language that rolled like stones down a mountainside. Finally, pain, her hands and feet burning as blood returned to frozen flesh, her scraped arms stinging, her head throbbing with each heartbeat. She kept her eyes closed, some instinct warning her to assess before revealing she was awake. The surface beneath her was soft. Furs, she realized, piled thick and smelling of smoke and herbs. The air was close and warm, nothing like the killing cold of the storm. Wherever she was inside, sheltered, alive. The voices continued, and though Elara did not speak the Highland tongue, she could read the tone. Anger, confusion, argument. One voice rose above the others, deep and commanding, shutting down the debate with what could only be a final decision. Footsteps approached, and she felt someone kneel beside her resting place. "I know you are awake, Lowlander." The words were spoken in the common trade language, accented but clear. Your breathing changed. Elara's eyes opened to find herself staring up at a face carved from granite and firelight. The man kneeling beside her was perhaps 30 winters old, his features hard and angular, his skin weathered by mountain winds. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, bound back with leather cords wrapped with small bones. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and penetrating, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. But she did not look away. She had learned from her mentor that showing fear to predators, whether animal or human, only made them strike faster. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as a rasp, her throat raw from the storm, in the heart of the Stone Wolf clan. "What signs?" His voice had gone very quiet. "The mark I bear." Elara reached for her collar with trembling fingers, pulling aside the torn leather to fully reveal her left shoulder. The firelight caught the scar there, a perfect spiral of flames that looked as though it had been branded into her skin with liquid fire. In truth, she did not remember receiving it. She had woken one morning in her 13th winter to find it there, burning and painful, with no explanation for its appearance. Her mentor had gasped upon seeing it, calling it a sign from the old gods, but would never explain further. The reaction in the chamber was immediate and electric. Warriors stepped back. Someone dropped a weapon with a clatter. Kale stared at the mark, his face gone white beneath its weathering. "Impossible," he whispered. "The Fire Queen's mark. It cannot be, and yet it is." Elara's voice was steady, though inside she was terrified. She did not understand what this mark meant to these people, but she was gambling her life that it meant something important enough to stay their hands. An older warrior pushed forward, grey-bearded and scarred, his eyes blazing with fury. "It is a trick, a lowland deception. The Fire Queen died 7 generations past. Her line is broken. This outsider mocks us with false signs. The mark is real, Torin. Kael's voice carried absolute authority. I can see its age. It is no new wound or painted symbol. She has carried this since childhood. Then she is a thief. Torin spat. She stole it from our stories, branded herself to deceive us. I branded nothing. Ilara's own anger rose. I woke one morning to find it there. I've carried it for 10 winters, not understanding its meaning, only knowing that it marked me as different. I'm no thief, old man. If this symbol belongs to your people, then perhaps you should ask yourselves why it appeared on one who has never set foot in your mountains until yesterday. The chamber erupted in argument. Warriors shouted at each other in the Highland tongue, gesturing wildly. Some pointed at Ilara with weapons, others with wonder. Through it all, Kael remained still, his eyes never leaving the mark on her shoulder. His expression was unreadable, but his jaw worked as though wrestling with some internal battle. Finally, he stood and raised both hands. The chamber fell silent instantly. The mark is genuine, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the space. Whether by destiny, by the will of the old gods, or by some design we do not yet understand, this woman bears the sign of our first queen. Our laws are ancient, but they are also clear. He turned to face Ilara fully, and something in his eyes had changed. Still hard, still dangerous, but no longer simply threatening. The one who bears the Fire Queen's mark cannot be cast out or harmed. She must be protected, sheltered, and claimed by the strongest warrior of the tribe. He knelt again, and this time when he reached out, it was not to check for life, but to place his hand over the mark on her shoulder. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. His eyes held hers with an intensity that stole her breath. By the old law, by the first fire, by the blood of our ancestors, I claim you under the right of fire protection. You are no longer an outsider. You are no longer alone. His voice dropped intimate and fierce. You belong to my fire now, Ilara of the lowlands. You belong to me. The words hung in the smoky air like an oath. Ilara wanted to protest, to reject this claim, to demand her freedom. But looking into Kael's eyes, she saw something that stopped her. Not possession, but recognition. As though he saw in her something he had been searching for without knowing. And despite everything, despite her fear, despite her desire to return to her own people, some deep part of her responded to those words with a whisper that terrified her more than any storm. Yes. The days that followed Kael's claiming were unlike anything Ilara had experienced. The Stone Wolf clan operated under laws that seemed to come from another age entirely, codes of honor and duty that the lowland people had long since abandoned for trade agreements and coin. Here your word was your bond, and breaking an oath meant death. Here, the strong protected the weak, not out of charity, but because the tribe's survival depended on every member pulling their weight. Here fire was sacred, and the hearth was the heart of all life, as Kael's claimed one. Ilara was given a place in his personal chamber, a large space carved deep in the mountain, its walls covered with weapons and pelts, dominated by a central fire pit that was never allowed to die. A young woman named Sarah was assigned to help her, teaching her the clan's customs and language. Sarah was wary at first, clearly uncertain what to make of this lowlander who had appeared bearing an impossible mark. But her natural warmth eventually won out. You must understand, Sarah explained on the 3rd day, as she helped Ilara into proper Highland clothing, leather leggings reinforced with fur, a long tunic decorated with bone beads, a heavy cloak lined with wolf pelt. The Fire Queen was not just our first ruler. She was the one who united the clans, who brought the secret of keeping fire alive through winter, who taught our ancestors to survive in these mountains. When she died, her daughters fought for power. The clan split. Blood was spilled. We have never fully healed from that wound. Ilara adjusted the heavy copper armband Sarah had fastened above her elbow. And the mark? How did she bear it? The stories say she walked into the sacred fire and emerged unburned, marked by the flames themselves. that the fire recognized her as its child and gave her its blessing. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. Kale's grandmother was a shaman. Before she died, she prophesied that the Fire Queen's mark would return, that someone would come from outside to heal the ancient wound. Most thought her mad with age, but Kale believed. He's been waiting for this sign since he was old enough to understand the stories, so that's why he claimed me so quickly. Ilara felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. He sees me as a symbol, not a person. Sarah gave her a sharp look. Do not mistake the cave chief's reasons. Yes, he believes in the prophecy, but I saw his face when he knelt before you. That was not duty alone in his eyes. Before Ilara could respond, a commotion arose from outside the chamber. Angry voices, the sound of weapons being drawn. Sarah's expression shifted to alarm. Stay here, she ordered, then slipped through the leather curtain that served as a door. But Ilara had never been good at following orders when her curiosity was aroused. She moved to the curtain, peering through a gap in the leather. What she saw made her blood run cold. A group of warriors had entered the main cavern, but these were not Stonewolf clan. Their faces were painted differently, streaks of white and black like lightning strikes. Their leader was a massive man, taller even than Kyle, with a necklace of teeth around his throat and scars crisscrossing his bare chest despite the mountain cold. Kyle! The man's voice boomed off the stone walls. I have come to challenge your claim. The Lowlander is a liar and a spy. She should be cast out or given to the Sky Serpent clan for judgment. Release her or face me in the circle of challenge. Kyle stepped forward from where he had been conferring with his council. He looked utterly calm, but Ilara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand rested casually on the hilt of the obsidian blade at his belt. Darius, you are far from Sky Serpent territory. State your true business. My business is protecting the Highlands from lowland corruption. Darius spat on the stone floor. Your father would never have allowed this. He would never have claimed an outsider, mark or no mark. You dishonor his memory and endanger us all. The lowland armies grow stronger. They push into our hunting grounds. And now you bring one of them into our very heart? She is no spy. She is a healer, nothing more. Then why does she bear a symbol she cannot explain? Why did she appear now, when the lowland king speaks of conquest? Why does she ask questions about our defenses, our numbers, our sacred places? Darius's eyes glittered with malice. Yes, I have spies of my own, Kyle. I know she has been learning our language, walking our caves, studying our ways. Wake up before her knife finds your throat in the night. Murmurs ran through the assembled warriors. Some nodded in agreement. The tension in the cavern thickened like smoke. Ilara could not stay hidden. Whatever was happening, it concerned her directly. She pushed through the leather curtain and stepped into the main chamber. Every eye turned to her. She felt the weight of their judgment, their suspicion, their fear. I'm no spy, she said clearly, in the trade language all could understand. I ask questions because I wish to understand your ways, not to betray them. I study your caves because I am a healer, and I see sickness in some of your people that I know how to treat. I learn your language because I cannot remain among you and speak only my own tongue, like a challenge. Ilara had heard of these from the traders. Ritual combats where Highland warriors fought to resolve disputes their councils could not. They were brutal affairs, fought with blade and fist and stone, ending only when one warrior yielded or died. And from what she understood, chiefs rarely yielded. Kyle, don't, she found herself saying. This is foolish. Let me speak with my caravan when they return this way. Let me prove I'm no spy through my actions, not through bloodshed. But Kyle was not looking at her. He was staring at Darius with an expression of cold calculation. You want to challenge me for the Lowlander? Very well. But know this, Darius, I do not fight only for her. I fight for the honor of my father's memory that you dared to invoke. I fight for the right of the Stone Wolf clan to shelter whom we choose. I fight for the old laws that say the bearer of the Fire Queen's mark cannot be cast out by any chief, including you. He drew his blade in a smooth motion. And I fight to remind you that your clan is not the only one with teeth. The cavern erupted in shouts. Warriors began to clear a space in the center, pushing back fire pits and stacking storage bundles against the walls. Someone brought out a circular boundary marked in white stone, the challenge circle. To step outside, it was to yield. To fall and not rise was to lose. Sarah appeared at Ilara's side, her face pale. "This is bad. Darius is undefeated in 17 challenges. He crippled the last chief who opposed him. Kael is skilled, but Darius fights without honor, without limits. He will kill him if he can. Then stop this." Ilara grabbed Sarah's arm. "There must be some way to call it off. Once the challenge is spoken and accepted, only death or yielding ends it. Those are the old laws." Sarah's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Pray to whatever gods you lowlanders worship that Kael is faster than he is strong." The two chiefs entered the circle, stripped to the waist despite the cold, their skin painted with clan symbols. Darius bore a heavy stone axe, its blade napped to a wicked edge. Kael held his obsidian blade, lighter, faster, but requiring more skill to wield effectively. They began to circle each other, and the cavern fell absolutely silent except for the crackle of the fires. Darius struck first, a feint with the axe followed by a kick aimed at Kael's knee. Kael spun aside, his blade flickering out to trace a thin line across Darius's ribs. First blood. A roar went up from the stone wolf warriors, but Darius only smiled. "Good. This will be more fun than I thought." They clashed again, and this time there was no testing, no caution. The axe swung in brutal arcs, while the obsidian blade danced and cut. Kael was faster, slipping inside Darius's guard to open cuts on his arms, his chest, his face. But Darius was stronger, and each time the axe connected, even blocked, it drove Kael back, forcing him toward the circle's edge. Ilara watched in horror as the fight continued. Both men bleeding now, both beginning to slow. This was madness. This was savagery. And yet she could not look away, could not deny the terrible beauty in their movements. The way they fought, not just with weapons, but with perfect understanding of their bodies, their limits, their opponent's tells. Then Darius made his move. He feinted high with the axe, Kael raised his blade to block, and Darius's other hand shot out, holding a fistful of ash from the nearest fire pit. He threw it directly into Kael's eyes. The crowd's roar turned to outrage. This was not honorable. This was cheating. But in the challenge circle, there were no rules beyond stay inside and win. Blinded, Kael stumbled. Darius's axe swung in a brutal overhead arc, aimed at his skull. Ilara screamed without meaning to, her voice cutting through the chaos, and Kael, somehow impossibly, dropped and rolled. The axe struck stone, sending up sparks. Still blinking away tears and ash, operating on instinct alone, Kael's blade swept up in a rising cut that opened Darius's inner thigh. The big warrior roared and staggered. Blood poured from the wound, a deep cut, dangerous, the kind that could kill if not treated quickly. He tried to press forward, to land one final blow, but his leg betrayed him. He fell to one knee. Kael's blade came to rest against his throat. "Yield," Kael said quietly, "or die." For a long moment, the entire cavern held its breath. Then Darius spat blood and growled, "I yield." Kael stepped back, lowering his blade. "Ilara, he needs a healer." And just like that, Ilara's paralysis broke. She rushed forward with her satchel, pushing through the warriors, dropping to her knees beside Darius. The big man glared at her with pure hatred, but he did not stop her as she pressed a thick pad of moss against his wound. "Hold this," she ordered. Firm pressure. "You," she pointed at one of Darius's warriors, "bring me clean water and the hottest stone you can carry wrapped in leather." She worked quickly, her healer's training taking over. The wound was deep but clean. The blade had missed the major vessel by a hair's breadth. With proper care, he would keep the leg. She threaded her bone needle with sinew and began to stitch, her hands steady even as her mind raced. Behind her she heard Kael addressing the crowd. "The challenge is won. The matter is settled. Darius, you and your warriors are welcome to shelter here until your chief can travel safely. That is the law of hospitality, and I will honor it regardless of what has passed between us." A grudging respect flickered in Darius's eyes as Ilara tied off the final stitch. "You are a fool, Kael, son of Theron," he said. "But you are an honorable fool. Perhaps that is enough. He looked down at Ilara. And you could have let me bleed. You could have taken revenge for the threat I made. I am a healer, Ilara said simply. I treat those who need treatment. That is my law. Something shifted in the cavern's atmosphere. Warriors who had watched her with suspicion now looked at her with something approaching respect. She had not only refrained from vengeance, but had rushed to save the man who wanted her cast out. In a culture that valued strength and honor above all, her actions spoke louder than any defense she could have voiced. Later, after Darius had been moved to a sleeping chamber and his warriors had settled into an uneasy truce, Kyle found Ilara sitting by his personal fire, staring into the flames. Her hands were still shaking from the aftermath of adrenaline. He sat beside her, his own wounds bandaged, nothing serious, though he would bear new scars. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Kyle said quietly, "Thank you for treating him. You did not have to." "I am a healer," Ilara repeated. "It is what I do." "No," Kyle's voice was firm. "You are more than your skills. You are the woman who did not let hatred rule her actions, who saw an enemy in pain and chose mercy." He reached out, hesitating, then gently took her hand. "You are the one who bears the mark of the Fire Queen, and whether you believe in prophecy or not, I begin to think it is no accident you are here." Ilara looked at their joined hands, at the fire dancing between them, and felt something fundamental shift in her chest. She had come to these mountains by accident, fleeing a storm. But perhaps Kale was right. Perhaps some things were meant to be. "You called me yours," she said softly, "when you claimed me, but I have never belonged to anyone." "Then perhaps," Kale replied, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand, "it is time we both learned what it means to belong to each other." The fire crackled. Outside, the eternal mountain wind howled, and Ilara, for the first time since entering these caves, felt something that might have been hope. The moon turned from crescent to full and back again. And with each passing day, Ilara felt herself changing in ways that both frightened and exhilarated her. She learned the Highland tongue, her accent improving until she could converse freely with the clan. She learned their customs, how to read weather in the color of the morning sky, how to preserve meat in the deep, cold caves, which mushrooms were safe and which brought visions. She learned their stories, sitting by the fire while elders recounted the deeds of heroes long dead. And she learned Kyle. He was not the cold, ruthless chief she had first thought. In council, yes, he could be harsh and unyielding, making decisions that prioritized the clan's survival over individual comfort. But with his people he was fair and protective. He remembered every child's name, every elder's ailment, every warrior's family. He carried the weight of their lives on his shoulders and never complained about the burden. With Ilara, he was different still, patient as she fumbled with new words, attentive when she spoke of her own people and the village she had left behind, careful never to push her beyond what she was willing to give, despite the claim he had made over her that first day. They shared his chamber but not his furs, and though she often caught him watching her across the fire with an intensity that made her skin warm, he never acted on whatever thoughts burned behind those storm-grey eyes. "You are too honorable for your own good," she told him one evening, as they sat reviewing plans for the spring hunt. The stone table between them was covered with maps, scratched into leather, marking territories and game trails. Kyle looked up, surprised. "How so?" "You claimed me. By your laws, I am yours, and yet you treat me like a guest, like someone who might leave at any moment." "Because you might," his voice was quiet. "The spring thaw comes soon. The passes will open. Your caravan might return, or another will come. You could leave these mountains, return to your people, to the boy who asked you to stay." He set down the piece of charcoal he had been using to mark the leather. "I claimed you to save your life, Ilara, not to cage it, and if I don't want to leave." The question hung between them. Gale's eyes widened fractionally, then narrowed as he studied her face. Do not say such things lightly. This life is hard. Our winters kill even the strong. We have enemies on every border. The lowland armies grow bolder each year. You could have safety, comfort, a healer's respected position in some village where the greatest danger is a difficult childbirth. I could also have boredom, predictability, a life where each day is the same as the last. Ilara leaned forward. Do you know what I feel here, Kyle? I feel alive, needed. Every day brings new challenges, new problems to solve. When I set that child's broken arm last week, her mother cried and called me blessed. When I treated the infection in old Torin's leg, the warriors who thought me a spy offered me their respect. I'm not just a healer here. I am part of something larger than myself. You are part of the clan, Kale agreed. But is that enough? Or will you wake one morning and regret the choice to stay? Will you? She challenged. You claim me because of a mark on my skin, because of a prophecy told by a dying shaman. What if the prophecy is wrong? What if I am just a woman who bears a strange scar, nothing more? Will you regret binding yourself to me? Kale stood abruptly, circling the table to stand before her. He reached out and pulled aside her collar, his fingers tracing the spiral of flames marked into her skin. The touch sent shivers down her spine. I claimed you for the mark, yes, he said, his voice low and rough. But I would keep you for the woman beneath it. For your courage and your mercy. For the way you speak your mind, even when it might earn you anger. For your stubborn refusal to give up, even when death stalked you in the storm. His thumb traced along her collarbone. You asked if I would regret my claim. Never. My only regret is that you might one day regret staying. Then we are both fools, Ilara whispered. She reached up, her hand covering his where it rested against her shoulder. Because I could never regret finding my way to your fire. The kiss that followed was inevitable as sunrise. His lips were warm, tasting of the spiced tea they drank against the cold. Her hands tangled in his long hair, pulling him closer. They broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. And Ilara knew with absolute certainty that she had found something in these mountains that she had never known she was searching for. But fate, it seemed, was not done testing her resolve. 3 days later, a runner arrived from the lowlands with urgent news. A delegation was coming, sent by the lowland king himself. They sought passage through the highlands and wished to parley with the clan chiefs about establishing a trading post in the mountains. And leading the delegation was someone who knew Ilara well, her former mentor, the old healer who had trained her. This is a trap, Torin growled in council, his suspicion of lowlanders undimmed despite his healed leg. They come seeking permission for trade, but they map our defenses. They count our warriors. They learn our weaknesses. And now they have a spy within our very walls who can tell them everything. I am no spy. Ilara stood, her frustration boiling over. How many times must I prove myself? I fought to save Darius when I could have let him die. I have healed your sick, taught your young healers new techniques, asked for nothing in return. What more do you want from me? We want the truth, another council member said. If you are innocent, why does your former teacher come now? Why does she lead this delegation? Because she taught me and she worries. Ilara's voice cracked with emotion. I disappeared in a storm. The caravan left me for dead. She probably believes I perished in the mountains and comes to honor my memory or to find my remains. Do you truly think so little of me that you cannot see the simple truth? Kyle raised his hand for silence. The delegation will be received with honor as our laws demand. They will be given food and shelter for 3 days. During that time, Ilara will speak with her mentor and learn the true purpose of their journey. His eyes found hers across the council fire. But know this, if treachery is revealed, if the lowlanders have come with conquest in their hearts, then we will defend our home with all our strength. And Ilara, he paused, the weight of his next words heavy in the smoky air. You will have to choose which side of the mountain you truly belong to. The delegation arrived the following afternoon, their approach signaled by watchers stationed at the valley entrance. Ilara stood with Kyle at the cave mouth, her heart pounding as she watched the small group make their way up the steep path. There were perhaps 15 people, soldiers bearing the king's banner, servants carrying supplies, and at their center a small figure wrapped in familiar green robes. Ilara? The old woman's voice carried across the distance, disbelieving and full of joy. By all the spirits, child, you live. Before Ilara could stop herself, she was running down the path, her careful Highland composure forgotten. Her mentor caught her in a fierce embrace, and for a moment, Ilara was 12 winters old again, seeking comfort after her first difficult healing. Before responsibility and pride had built walls around her heart. Mireth, she breathed into the old woman's shoulder. I thought I would never see you again. As did I. Mireth pulled back, her weathered hands framing Ilara's face, checking for injuries with a healer's practiced eye. The caravan returned without you. They said you fell during the storm, that they searched but found no trace. I refused to believe you were gone. I petitioned the king himself for permission to search these mountains. Her eyes traveled past Ilara to where Kale stood watching, his face unreadable. Though I see you have found shelter in unexpected places. The formal welcome that followed was awkward, tension crackling beneath the surface of polite words. The delegation was shown to guest chambers deep in the caves, far enough from the clan's living quarters to prevent easy spying, but close enough to observe. Kale assigned warriors to serve as guides and guards, their dual purpose clear to everyone. That evening, Ilara sat with Mireth in the guest chamber, the old woman examining her with eyes that missed nothing. You have changed, Mireth said finally. Not just your clothing or your hair, something deeper. You move like them now. You speak their language. You wear their mark on your arm. She touched the copper armband that marked Ilara as claimed. Tell me true, child. Are you here of your own will, or are you a prisoner made to smile? I am here by choice, Ilara said firmly. They saved my life. They could have cast me out or worse, but they sheltered me. Kyle, the cave chief, he claimed me under their old laws when he saw this. She pulled aside her collar to reveal the fire mark. They believe it is a sacred sign, that I am meant to be here. Mireth's sharp intake of breath told Ilara the old woman recognized the symbol, the Fire Queen's mark. I had hoped it meant nothing, that it was merely a strange scar. But you have found the ones who remember its meaning. She gripped Ilara's hands urgently. Listen to me carefully. The king did not send us only to search for you. He plans to build a fort in these mountains, to establish control over the passes. He sees the Highland clans as savages blocking valuable trade routes. If they resist, he will bring his armies. Horror washed over Ilara. Mireth, no. These people, they are not savages. They have laws on a culture as rich as our own. They do not deserve to be conquered because the king wants easier roads for his merchants. I agree. Mireth's voice was grim, which is why I volunteered to lead this delegation. I hope to convince the clans to accept a peaceful trading arrangement, to show them that cooperation with the lowlands could benefit both peoples. But I have been in these caves only a few hours, and already I see the suspicion in their eyes. They will not trust us. And without trust, there can be no peace. Then I will help build that trust, Ilara said desperately. I can be a bridge between our peoples. I know both sides now. I can translate not just words, but understanding. Can you? Mireth's gaze was penetrating. Or will you be torn in half when the bridge is pulled from both ends? War is coming, Ilara. Perhaps not this season or the next, but it comes nonetheless. When it does, you will stand in the middle, and both sides will demand you choose. The old woman's words haunted Ilara through the next 2 days as the delegation met with the clan council. She served as translator, carefully rendering each side's words in ways that minimized offense, but she could feel the fundamental mistrust beneath every exchange. The Lowlanders saw the Highlanders as backward and violent. The Highlanders saw the Lowlanders as soft and deceitful, and no amount of careful diplomacy could bridge centuries of mutual fear. On the third night, Kyle found Ilara sitting alone by the sacred fire, the eternal flame that the Fire Queen herself had supposedly kindled. She had been staring into its depths for hours, searching for answers in its dancing light. "Your mentor prepares to leave at dawn," Kyle said, settling beside her. "She has invited you to return with her. To come home." "The lowlands are not my home anymore," Ilara said softly. "Not in the way they once were, but they are still your people. Your blood. The boy who asked you to stay. He waits there still, perhaps. A life of safety and respect." Kyle's jaw tightened. "I would not hold you here against your will. If you wish to leave, I will release my claim. You would depart with honor and our gratitude for all you have done." Ilara turned to look at him, seeing the pain he tried to hide behind stoic words. "Is that what you want? For me to go? What I want matters little compared to what is right for you. Then let me tell you what is right for me." Ilara took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I belong here, Kyle, not because of prophecy or sacred marks or ancient laws. I belong here because this is where I choose to be. These caves have become my home. Your people have become my people. And you—" She lifted his hand to her lips, kissing his scarred knuckles. "You have become my heart." The relief that flooded Kyle's face was almost painful to witness. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, his whole body shaking with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. "I love you," he said roughly. "I have tried not to, tried to prepare myself for you to leave, but I cannot help it. You are the fire that warms my coldest nights. You are the light in these dark caves. You are everything I did not know I was missing." "Then keep me," Ilara whispered. "Not as a claimed prize or a prophesied queen. Keep me as the woman who loves you in return. As your partner, your equal, your mate in all ways." That night they finally shared more than just a chamber. They shared breath and skin and whispered promises in the firelight. They claimed each other in ways that went far deeper than ritual words, binding themselves together with a completeness that felt as ancient and inevitable as the mountains themselves. When dawn came, Ilara stood with Kale to bid farewell to the delegation. Mirith's face showed no surprise at seeing them together, at the way Ilara leaned into Kale's side, at the new marks on her neck that spoke clearly of how the night had been spent. "So you have truly chosen," the old woman said, her voice heavy with acceptance and sorrow both. "I have," Ilara confirmed. "But I have not abandoned my people, Mirith. I'm still a lowlander in blood, just as I am now a highlander in spirit. When war comes, and we both know it will, I will stand between our peoples and fight for peace with everything I have. I will be the bridge, no matter how much it costs me. That is a hard road you choose, child. The best roads always are." Ilara embraced her mentor one final time. "Tell the king that the cave chief of the Stone Wolf clan is willing to negotiate in good faith. Tell him that there are wonders in these mountains beyond trade routes and fortifications. Tell him that conquest would spill more blood than he can imagine, but cooperation could enrich both our lands. And tell him—" She paused, gathering courage. "Tell him that the Fire Queen has returned to the Highlands, and she remembers that her first act was not war, but unity." Mirith's eyes widened. "You claim the title? I claim nothing. But if the prophecy is true, if I am meant to be here, then let me fulfill that purpose. Let me be what the first Fire Queen was, a bridge builder, a peacemaker, a protector of all peoples, highland and lowland alike." She glanced back at Kyle, who nodded his support. "We have months before the snows close the passes again. Use that time to convince your king that there is a better way than war." The delegation departed, winding their way down the mountain path until they disappeared into the morning mist. Ilara stood watching until they were gone, feeling the weight of the choice she had made settle onto her shoulders like a cloak. "Do you think they will listen?" Kale asked quietly. "I don't know," Ilara admitted. "But I have to try. For your people and mine. For the future we might build together if we can just survive long enough to see it. Then we will try together." Kale's arms circled her waist, solid and warm. "You and I, fire and stone, lowland and highland. We will show both our peoples that unity is possible." Ilara leaned into him, watching the sun rise over the peaks, painting the snow gold and rose. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be resistance from both sides, suspicion and hatred to overcome, perhaps battles to prevent or fight. But as she stood there with Kyle beside her, with the eternal fire burning at her back and the morning light spreading across the mountains before her, Ilara felt something she had rarely experienced: certainty. She had been left alone in the storm, cast out by those she traveled with, abandoned to die in the killing cold. But that storm had brought her here, to these caves, to this clan, to this man who had claimed her and whom she now claimed in return. The fire mark on her shoulder, mystery that it was, had opened doors she never knew existed. And whether by destiny or chance or the will of gods she did not fully understand, she had found her place in the world. "You belong to my fire now," Kyle had said that first day, but the truth was more complex and more beautiful than those words could capture. She belonged to the fire, yes, but the fire also belonged to her. It always had. From the moment she woke to find the mark burned into her skin, she had been tied to this place, to these people, to a purpose larger than herself. In the months that followed, Ilara and Kale worked to prepare for what might come. She trained more healers, teaching them techniques from the lowlands that could save lives in battle. She helped strengthen diplomatic ties with other Highland clans, using her story, the lowlander accepted by the Stone Wolves, as proof that outsiders could be trusted. She learned to fight with blade and staff, determined never to be helpless again. And she loved Kale with a fierceness that sometimes frightened them both, as though trying to compress a lifetime of feeling into whatever time they might have before the world tore them apart. When winter came, sealing the passes with snow and ice, they had a season of peace. The clan gathered around fires to tell stories and plan for spring. Children were born, elders passed into the next world, and life continued its eternal cycle in the deep mountain caves. On the longest night of winter, Kale and Ilara stood before the eternal fire and spoke the ancient words that bound them as true mates before all the clan. No longer chief and claimed, but partners, equals, two halves of one whole. As spring thaw approached and the passes began to open, word came from the lowlands. The king had agreed to send ambassadors for formal negotiations. There would be a gathering of all Highland clans, a great council where the future of the mountains would be decided. And Ilara, as the Fire Queen reborn, would stand at its center. The night before they were to depart for the council grounds, Ilara stood once more before the eternal fire. She thought of the girl she had been, curious, restless, convinced she needed to leave her village to find her purpose. She thought of the storm that had stripped everything away, leaving her with nothing but will and chance. She thought of Kale's grey eyes meeting hers in the firelight, of the words he had spoken, "You belong to my fire now." But she understood now that it was not his fire she belonged to. It was the fire itself, the eternal flame that had burned since the first Fire Queen kindled it. The sacred light that represented everything the Highland clans valued. Warmth in the cold, light in the dark, life in the face of death. That fire had called to her across mountains and time, marking her, claiming her, bringing her home to a place she had never been. Kale's arms circled her from behind, his chin resting on the top of her head. "Ready?" he asked. Ilara smiled, placing her hands over his, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. "I was left alone in the storm," she said softly, "lost and dying with no hope of survival. But the storm brought me to your fire, and your fire brought me home." "Our fire," Kyle corrected, his breath warm against her ear. "It has always been our fire. I think perhaps it was waiting for you all along." As they stood together in the dancing light, Ilara knew he was right. The path ahead would be hard. Peace always was. There would be those who opposed her, who saw her as traitor or outsider or threat. There would be moments of doubt and fear, times when the bridge she tried to build would seem impossible to complete. But she was no longer alone. She had Kale, fierce and loyal, who had claimed her when she was nothing but a freezing stranger in his caves. She had the clan, who had learned to trust her, to value her, to see beyond the lowland blood to the highland heart beneath. She had the mark on her shoulder, mysterious and powerful, reminding her that some things were meant to be. And she had the fire, eternal, unchanging, burning bright against all darkness. Let the negotiations come. Let the clans gather. Let both her peoples, lowland and highland alike, see what could be built when fire and stone, stranger and home, chose to bind together instead of break apart. Elara had been left alone in the storm, but she had found her way through the darkness to the light. And now, standing before the eternal flame with Kyle beside her, she understood the truth that the first Fire Queen must have known, that home was not a place you were born, but a fire you chose to tend, a people you chose to protect, a love you chose to honor. The storm had brought her here. But she would stay by choice, always by choice, because she belonged to the fire, and the fire burned in her heart, and nothing, not war, not fear, not the weight of two worlds on her shoulders, would ever extinguish it. This was her home. This was her fire. This was where she belonged, and she would burn bright enough for everyone to see.